We're going to show you the steps to replace the fuel pump module in this 1997 Chevrolet S10 Blazer. Before we begin the repair, we'll now disconnect the negative battery cable. With the fuel gauge attached, we will bleed the pressure off the system. Always be sure and capture any fuel that you bleed off into a safe container. Now we will raise the vehicle in order to gain access to the fuel tank. Start by removing the filler tube hose. We will have to actually remove the hose after we start lowering the tank. We want to be sure and get the clamps loose now. Now we will remove the straps. Before we can lower the tank, we'll have to remove this protective shield. Now that we have it partially lowered, finish the removal of the tank filler hose and vent pipe. Once we lower the tank to this position, we now have access to the fuel line fittings and the electrical connections. We can remove the fuel lines. Now we need to disconnect the electrical connection for the fuel pump, disconnect the return line, and then disconnect the emissions line. Then we'll move to the front of the tank and disconnect another emissions line. Now we will lower the tank and remove it from underneath the vehicle. We want to be sure and clean the outside of the tank before we remove the fuel pump module. This is to keep any unwanted debris from getting in the tank. We will need to remove the fuel line retainers in order to reuse them on the new fuel pump module. Now we will remove the tank locking ring. This is a snap ring design, which will require a set of snap ring pliers. As we remove this module assembly, keep in mind there is a reservoir that will retain fuel in it. We'll have to capture that to dispose of properly. It's always important to look at the snap ring to make sure that it's not compromised in any way as far as with rust that would inhibit its ability to seal properly. We've elected to replace the snap ring. This is an LR3002, which is available through Airtex products. At this point, we need to drain the remaining fuel into a safe container and then clean the inside of the tank. We want to be sure that the tank is as clean as possible to allow a clean environment for the fuel pump. Now that we've thoroughly cleaned the inside of the tank, we'll install a new Airtex fuel pump module. We have a tank seal. We also have a GM wiring harness that may be required to be replaced on some applications. We'll remove the float arm. Also on the end of the float arm, you'll notice that there's a red protector cap. We need to remove it. Now we will install the float arm into the sender assembly. This will slide into the center bushing and it will snap into the arm. Once it's snapped into location, we're ready to install the unit. First, put the tank seal onto the module assembly. We'll just move it up the module assembly about halfway. Then we're ready to install the module into the tank. On top of the flange is a locating tab. In the top of the tank is where that locating tab will set. We'll lay the tank seal into location. You can use a silicone type lube around the bottom of the flange module in order to allow a smoother installation. And be sure to note to get it into the proper location. Once we've got it down, we'll install our lock ring. Easiest to install, start installing this on one side and work your way around the top of the pump module. Move the lock ring out to where it's fully seated underneath the retainers. Now we're ready to put the tank back underneath the vehicle. Take the fuel line retainers that we removed from the old fuel pump module and we will install them in the ends of the fuel lines. They are two different sizes. Be sure and get them in the correct fuel line. Once we get partially up, we will start the filler tube and the vent tube into their locations and also the emissions line in the front of the tank. Reconnect the electrical connectors. Be sure and note that we reinstall the safety retainer on the electrical connector. And we can reattach the pressure line and the return line. Retighten the hose clamps on your filler hose. We can now reinstall our tank straps and reinstall the shield. Reinstall the negative battery cable. We'll cycle the key a few times. Start the vehicle. Once you've started the vehicle, be sure and monitor your fuel pressure gauge to make sure it's within vehicle specs. To remove the gauge, we'll shut the engine off and bleed the pressure from the system using the pressure relief on the gauge, making sure to capture any fuel in a safe container.